Tunya Musime. I'm going to be the moderator for the next very important session, which we have invited Professor Bagele Chilisa on her very well-known book, Indigenous Research Methodologies. Due to technical facilitations that we must just make sure that everything is on point. We need an extra 4 minutes. Thank you. taken a bit of time sorting out the technology on this side. I'd like to introduce to you Professor Bagele Chilisa. She is a full professor of the Postgraduate Research and Evaluation Program at the University of Botswana, and has over the last 30 years taught courses on research design, measurement and evaluation to graduate and undergraduate students. She has supervised more than 50 master's and PhD dissertations and has served as an external examiner for PhD theses in the Sdg region and beyond. She also conducts professional development workshops on Indigenous research methodologies and contextuality and culturally relevant evaluation around the world. She has also served as a guest speaker, resource person, and keynote speaker at many different spaces, both in the global north and the global south. And this morning she is here because it would have been remiss to have a big conference on where one of the big themes is decolonizing methods and not have a well-renowned scholar on Indigenous research methodologies as one of our highlights here in Botswana, especially us being the hosts of this very important conference. With those few remarks, I'd like to invite to the stage Professor Bagele Chilisa. Welcome, and do sit down.
Thank you.
I hope you are comfortable.
Yes.
Right. Apologies once again. This is a very, very important day for me personally and for my friend, mentor, and professor, colleague, Professor Bagele Chilisa. She calls me Flower. I call her Bagele. And when the opportunity arose of this conference, I organized the whole session around her book because of a recognition that oftentimes people like her are better known outside their own borders than within their own borders. So this is a celebration of this very phenomenal woman. And in the next 7 minutes, we're going to have an informal conversation before she gets into her keynote address, at which point she will move to the podium. Bagele, what is it being Bagele? One of the thematic issues in this conference is around identity, being, and experiences of selfhood from the global south. And one of the things that you say you wanted to do as a teenager was to have an English Christian name, because at that point, everybody was getting one, and your dad was not happy about that. What is it? What does the name Bagele mean? And can you share a little bit about the story of that name change and how it was to become one of the most important moments for you in understanding colonization and therefore why we need to resist it?
Yes, I'm Bagele. I'm firstborn, and my parents have taught me that I am a being with relations. So my mother is called Ma Bagele, and my late father, Tabagele. And by this, we understand the importance of relationships. You cannot be you, but you have to be you in relation to another human being, or any relation, in fact, to an animal. I'm not only Bagele. I have a totem. I'm a crocodile, and I belong to the crocodile lineage of women called the Bobadachi. So normally when I greet my parents, my mother or my aunt, they will say, Wamuka mukwena. Mukwena is my totem. And my grandmother used to say, Badachim talala. Bakazi babuya. Bakazi baboshi. Or she would praise me around that lineage. What is expected of women of my lineage? I grew up very confident because of this badachi. I really felt I was beautiful. And
Talking about beauty, you are such a wonderful storyteller, which is why storytelling is one of the most important methodological approaches you bring in your book, which we will talk in relation to this conference just in a bit. Talking about beauty, and you are indeed beautiful. And one of the things that your father, once again, you had conversations around with skin lightening.
Yes.
And it has become a really big topic that now we call colorism when we discuss the politics of Blackness within Blackness. So tell us also about just being, what are your conversations with your father around being a dark beauty?
So when I went to school at St. Joseph's, so when we went to school, my father called me and my sister, Baba. He said to us, you see your skin color. When you come back, I want you to be the same. I don't want to be confused on who I'm looking at. And so he called us Black Scotch. We're black and we're beautiful. So when we got to St. Joseph's, we found that there were skin lightening creams, Ambi. Africans must be improved, highlight. I used the highlight myself, but towards the end of the semester term, I would stop it so that when I got home, I will be myself.
And you say that still around your father, he introduced you to decolonization without calling it so. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, I think my father brought the term decolonization without even talking about it, because I do remember very well our discussions with naming. Why should you be called, why should you change your name? When I was asked to change my name from Bagele to Rose because I was being baptized, he simply said, but why? I'm not going to give you a name. That was a resistance. And since then, I do confront offensive language, offensive methodologies, and I do resist. And so decolonization is also about resisting that which is imperialism, cultural imperialism.
Thank you. And just one last point, because the reason that I'm asking these personal conversations about you is that reflexivity, positioning oneself within the discussion is one of the most important processes in the big project of decolonization of different types of things, including methods. So let's talk about COVID-19, and one of the themes you touch around is healing feminist methodologies. How do you think at this time when we are all hurting, we've all lost, a healing feminist methodology would come in handy from an indigenous approach? Heal us.
You caught me unaware. When you say COVID-19, my mind goes to what we have lost. And I've talked about COVID-19 from the perspective of it giving us space as Africans to be ourselves and to create our own. I'm saying so because when COVID-19 came, the first world locked itself and said, we want to do research for our communities, for our nations, for our people. And here we were locked up. And for the first time, we started thinking, okay, so let's try things ourselves. So when we talk COVID-19, the first thing that comes to me is its impact on us in terms of having to think for ourselves. And of course, in the process of that thinking for ourselves, feminism comes in, with women also beginning to think what should be done. I was very much impressed by that woman in Lesotho who was looking at traditional medicine and thought it wise to begin to investigate traditional herbs in Lesotho that are currently being used for coughs. And I thought, well, women are on the move.
With that, I'd like to invite you to the podium to give your keynote address. Thank you very much. We will have 10 minutes after her keynote address for Q&A, questions and answers. So feel free to ask questions and they will be responded to. Professor Chilisa, to the podium.
To the podium. Where's the podium?
Right to your left.
Oh, okay. What you need. Oh, okay. Can I get ready to go? Views and that don't feel offended by my views. These are my views. You are also free to say your views. Slide. Next slide. Okay, an overview. So when I was told to talk about indigenous methods and special methods, I slightly tweaked the theme to be indigenous method for urban sustainability in Africa. Because for us, whatever we do, it has to have a purpose. So I realized that the SDG 11 was the center for this conference. And the SDG 11 is about sustainable cities. So I decided that I would locate my discussion of indigenous research methodologies in the historic moment where we are now, and then talk about methodologies and paradigms, talk about an indigenous paradigm, and so on and so on. Next. So the SDG Goal 11 talks about making cities and human settlement inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And in that context, the targets are building sustainable and resilient buildings utilizing local materials, strengthening efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage, and by 2030, enhance inclusive and sustainable urbanization and capacity for participatory, integrated, and sustainable human settlement plan and management in all countries. Next. Next. So, what's wrong with evaluation research methodologies of the SDGs? We realize that evaluation research of the SDGs are viewed from the lenses of the global north and does not attend sufficiently to contextual issues. The frameworks are developed by funders and commissioners with a narrow focus on result. The perception is that everything that comes from the global north is superior and scientifically more robust. We are therefore using tried and tested theories and practices from the West, where the global South is just a passive recipient of these tried and tested theories. Capacity strengthening is all about transferring knowledge from the global North. So collaborative research is about transferring knowledge from the global North. And to have academic institutions that do not see the need to engage with research methodologies as a discipline. What do we need? We need fresh perspectives, novel ideas, and inspiring innovations informed by the worldviews and philosophies of the global South. Next. The SDGs, the African Union Agenda on Development, for example, pledges to mobilize its people to participate in continental development programs to the level where they can claim ownership and demonstrate self-reliance. They call for theories, frameworks, tools, methods, practices that will speak to accountability of governments and their institutions, ownership of programs by citizens, and equitable distribution of program benefits. Next. Can you bring on? refresh.
Royal Museum of Central Africa. For decades, generations of young Belgians visited this
Can you hear?
which claimed to lead them through a discovery of Kinshasa. For over a century, this museum was a totem to the glory and civilizing work of King Leopold II. It stood as a palace of colonial memory.
Okay, so I was going to play to you a video that talks places us in the current moment. And in that video, we see the museum in one of the African countries, a museum that was built, being knocked down. The museum, of course, displayed Africans as artifacts and ornaments in the slave trade. The museum had normalized the cruelty of the slave trade. And we are at a juncture where we ask ourselves, what are the methods to decolonize cities? What does one do with that which is offensive? If we talk sustainable cities, what does it mean when you have those symbols in those cities? What are the methods to decolonize space? SDG 11 seem to make the assumption that urban city planning happens in neutral spaces. We therefore cannot escape questioning ourselves on the assumptions that drive how we do research. These are the moments. George Lloyd said, "I cannot breathe." And these are the moments when we question the ontological genocide, linguistic genocide, epistemological genocide. Every research that we do is informed by some theoretical lens that the researcher consciously or unconsciously chooses. Let us take an example, the proposal to conduct tests in Africa in order to establish whether tuberculosis vaccine could cure COVID-19. We are told that 2 French doctors were accused of racism after they suggested that a trial on whether a tuberculosis vaccine would be effective against coronavirus should be conducted in Africa. And I quote, "In Africa, there are no masks, no treatment, no resuscitation. We do it a bit like is done elsewhere for some studies on AIDS. In prostitutes, we try things because we know they're highly exposed and they do not protect ourselves." That speaks to the moment. Much as we may say that research is neutral, research is political, and research can be very racist. And research is about the control of who owns knowledge. We are at a moment where things are changing, and as far back as 1919, Shurish and Michel sensitized us to the ontological and epistemological genocide of the other, of non-Westerners. Shurish says, when any group with a large complex civilization significantly dominates other groups for hundreds of years, the ways of the dominant group, that is the epistemologies, ontologies, and exologies, not only become the dominant ways of that civilization, but also these ways become so deeply embedded that these ways become, that they are seen as natural or appropriate norms, rather than as historically evolved social constructions. And Shurish goes on to say that our current range of epistemologies, positivism to postmodernism, arise out of the social history and culture of the dominant race. These epistemologies reflect and reinforce that social history and that social group. And this has become, and this has negative result for the people of color in general, and scholars of color in particular. So what is the current political research mode? We hear from this renowned researcher who says that we stand at the threshold of history marked by contested meanings. And he says, at some distance down this conceptual path, when its history is written, we'll find that this has been an era of emancipation. Emancipation from hearing only the voices of Western Europe. Emancipation from seeing the world in one color. And so, where are we? We are at a point where indigenous scholars are coming up with books. We have a book on indigenous statistics by Walter. We have a book on decolonizing methodologies by Smith. We have a book on research is ceremony by Wilson, and another book on indigenous research methods by Kuvesh. And what does it say, therefore, for research on urbanization in Africa? Indigenous statistics, what is it about? It tells us, indigenous statistics, Walter says that the statistics that you use basically are based on concepts, they're based on language, they're based on variables, and that therefore there are omissions from a non-Western perspective. There are omissions in the statistics that we use, whether you want to count people in urban areas or it's a census of a village. What are the omissions? Take care of the omissions. Most of you have read decolonizing methodologies, and therefore I'll go straight to indigenous methodologies. What are therefore these indigenous methodologies? Indigenous methodologies speak to resistance. They ask the question, what does one do to offensive symbols in the cities? I chose the topic sustainable cities. What does one do to offensive symbols in the cities. We know that when George Lloyd said, "I can't breathe," his voice could not be heard. And what happened? There was burning. You all know the riots. What are we doing to the genocide of our ontologies and epistemologies? What does one do to urban city planning frameworks that mutilate the land and take by force from communities resources like rivers and streams that provide water that sustain lives? The Havroni Dam here feeds the whole city, but oftentimes the Havroni Dam can no longer hold the city because when it rains, it doesn't get filled up. Why does it not get filled up? Because there are planning frameworks that has allowed the rich to own land, and therefore the rich, when they see a stream, they own the stream and create a dam, and the stream does not fill the Havroni Dam. What do you do to such frameworks and planning frameworks? These are planning frameworks that are based on borrowed Western frameworks. What do we do to academic and methodological imperialism? Indigenous methods are about resistance. Academic and methodological imperialism talks to unjustified and counterproductive tendency to dismiss and attempt to quash alternative theories, perspectives or methodologies, conceptualization framework, theoretical framework, research techniques that stem from non-Westerners. What we do to language in research that impose European thought? What do we do to the statistics language that frame the question in the context of Western thought? How do we resist globalization? The contemporary relation between the colonial societies and the former colonizers, where 2/3 of the world provide the raw materials in the form of raw data, and the colonizers turn them into theories, concepts that discuss 2/3 of the world in forms to recognize themselves. Collaborative research. We all participate in it, but most of the time we produce raw data. And when this raw data come in the form of the theories created for us, we can't even recognize the data. Indigenous research speak to alternative methodologies under an indigenous paradigm. There is a call for a fifth paradigm. An evolving discourse on indigenous research and indigenous methodologies is calling for a fifth paradigm to add to the typology of current paradigms. Currently, we talk of 5 paradigms. We talk of the post-positivist, the pragmatic, the transformative, and the constructivist paradigms. But indigenous scholars are not happy. We are not happy. And one of the indigenous scholars' writing says, we have tried to adopt dominant systems, research tools, by including our perspectives into their views. We have tried to include our cultures, traditional protocols, and practices into the research process through adapting suitable methods. The problem is that we cannot really remove the tools from their underlying beliefs. The problem is that the assumptions about the nature of reality, the nature of knowledge, and the nature of values, for as long as they differ, we cannot meet. The argument is that Western and indigenous paradigms are based on different assumptions about the nature of reality, knowledge, and values. A Western paradigm is based on Western worldviews, while an indigenous paradigm is based on holistic, localized worldviews. And the good news is that some people are now including an indigenous paradigm as one of the big 5 paradigms. And who are they? It's me and Health 2019. And I know that some will soon join. So what does it mean to talk about an indigenous paradigm? An indigenous paradigm has a relational ontology, a relational epistemology, and a relational axiologies. Ontologies, epistemologies under an indigenous paradigm embrace theorizing and drawing concepts from indigenous knowledge, from proverbs, from saying, from folklores, from language, from metaphors, and from lessons. That we get from our interaction with the environment. Indigenous method, they embrace resistance and decolonization of methodologies. So, on the nature of being, it's a pity you can't see my slide, but I can see that behind this Botswana thing, my slide is showing. Okay. So, we are beings with relations. And that is the ontology, that is the reality. And so, there is emphasis on the interconnectedness of the living and the non-living. People have a connection with each other, with the land, with animals. And in Africa, this is expressed through the adage, I am because we are. Building relationship is an essential value system. And you begin to ask yourself, as a researcher, how will you relate to the people? As a colonizer or knower, or as knowers, or you see them as knowers with values and indigenous knowledge that have value in informing the research process. How do you as researchers from diverse geographical locations relate to each other? If George Floyd could not be heard, how can I be sure I am heard? Will all researchers, irrespective of geographical location, invoke academic imperialism to question the production of knowledge and therefore to embrace all knowledge systems? I've already talked about myself being a crocodile, and my mother, of course, her totem is Chibelu, a beautiful bird. And so, when you talk of a relational ontology, a relational ontology calls for interdependence between the researchers and the research communities in ways that challenge helicopter research. And helicopter research is where researchers leave the research site when the study is completed, never to be seen again. We are all talking about our projects. And I know as soon as it's done, the researcher leaves the space. A relational ontology calls for relational ethics. The researcher needs to reflect on how the communities that are researched will benefit from the research, their role, and the place of indigenous knowledge and practice in the knowledge production, and how relationships will be continued. Under SDG 11, for example, who has knowledge on indigenous building materials? What will be the role of knowledge of knowledge holders, and what will be community benefit? And when you talk of relational epistemology, what are we talking about? It's all the systems of knowledge built on relations, says Wilson. It is about co-creating knowledge by peoples who have connections, networks, relationships with each other, with all that exists, including the living and the non-living. In Africa, it is expressed in the adage, I am because we are. A relational epistemology, therefore, derives its assumption from the we-ness, the us-ness, the I-we relationship. And it is an epistemology that is not Africa-centric or Afrocentric, but go beyond geographic borders and all forms of Eurocentrism. It's a concept, a philosophy that embraces all. I'm so excited to say that the I-we relationship has been embraced and is now informing how people, researchers, should relate to each other, and how even theories can come together to speak and make predictions that are useful. Deriving ethics theory from the honeybee. In your own space, you play the video. The video is about a hunter following the honeybee to get honey. And the trick is that the hunter should give back to the honeybee. And it is said that if the hunter does not give honey to the honeybee, next time the honeybee will lead to a dangerous animal. That says a lot about the ethics of research. When you are led, as a researcher, you are led by the participants to that knowledge that you treasure so much for your dissertation or for your project. What do you give back? And so this cosmos and interconnectedness of us with other beings and non-beings has led us to think in Africa about the ethics of interconnectedness, which has 9 R's, where we respect connectedness and we respect relations, where we have reverence for the cosmos. As an urban planner, what do you do when they tell you that the bridge cannot pass through that stream because that stream is a sacred stream. That hill is a sacred hill. What do you do? Indigenous methodologies have
emphasize ethics that respect and have reverence for the cosmos. Researchers have to share the cosmos feeling. There is reciprocity, giving back. There is responsibility. What is your responsibility as an African researcher? Are you leaving your indigeneity at the village and coming to operate as a Western scholar? Or you have a responsibility to restore that which we are losing, to revitalize that which you see, to come up with methods from what you do. Working with indigenous knowledge requires transdisciplinary approach. And so, in conclusion, I ask a question: how will urban researchers do the statistics? Will researchers borrow from indigenous statistics frameworks to avoid omissions, misrepresentation, pathologies, trending in current statistical data built on Western concepts, where it's all about deficiencies? The African Union calls for its citizens to participate in all developments and to claim ownership of the programs. Can current participatory approaches trending under Western paradigms do the job? Africa is on the move. Concepts and tools, indigenous tools to learn are emerging. Among concepts are the Made in Africa evaluation concept, indigenous ethics in Africa, the Bazaar participatory methods in Uganda, the Lakota method, the Moko method, orality methods, and a post-colonial indigenous research paradigm that guides research. Covert notes that a methodology removed from its paradigm loses meaning. And in a study on stigma among adolescents, I remember when we were interviewing the adolescents, they told us that what shocked them was when they were told, you are living with HIV/AIDS, and they responded, I don't live with HIV, I live with my mother. The interpretation under a Western paradigm is that the adolescent doesn't know what HIV/AIDS is. But under a relational paradigm, the interpretation is that the adolescent is asking the researcher to deconstruct the language that is used. We can derive our literature, our methods from indigenous lens, our theories, our stories, our methods. And in conclusion, I'm proud to say that even at the University of Botswana, we are beginning to use our idioms to inform research methods or method theory. And in that, let me say thank you.
That was bringing to focus your very important message about the interconnectedness between beings, human, the birds and the flies. So it came as a bit of an inconvenience, but it also buttressed the point that we do not exist except in connection with with other beings, even if they're just flies. As you were making that connection between resistance, indigenous methods as resistance, and what cities could look like if they spoke to the concepts, the cosmology, the interconnectedness within which they are growing. I wanted to imagine what would Gaborone look like if it was a Gaborone that also knew that it is a city connected to cows from Krokweng and goats from Mogoditane. Is there a possibility of a shared city between goats, cattle, and people? So that cities do not see that interconnectedness that indigenous approaches bring. We are farmers as well as we are workers, and we find ourselves in the same space. Is it something you'd want to maybe reflect on while I'm waiting for questions? And please, you are welcome from the floor to, and even in the chats, to ask questions. Yeah, would you like to speak about this fly and what?
Okay, so what does it mean to say we are connected, we have connections? It doesn't necessarily mean that we can inconvenience ourselves and find ourselves sharing the same space with goats and sheep. But it does emphasize the fact that there are different spaces. And it doesn't matter how far away the space is. There is that connection with that space. I'm a crocodile, but I don't live with crocodiles.
Okay.
They have their own space in the river.
Right. So, and there's a comment here from Hodisa Mokodi, who is actually physically in this room. And she says, my example of deconstruction was in my PhD study of poverty among female-headed households in Botswana. As I embarked on the study, I quickly became aware of the baggage associated with the concept of female-headed household. Contradictions in gendered notions of power and control that are embedded in localized realities of patriarchal practices where women are subordinated. As a result, my study focused more on understanding participants' perceptions of gender, headship, power, and control based on their everyday lives. I think this is a comment that further reiterates the point that you are making about how concepts, unless understood within even a word like households. In your book, what are some of the suggestions for people working in areas with notions such as households, family from an indigenous perspective?
In my book, the suggestion is for Africans, indigenous scholars to recreate, to reproduce, to come up with tools, with methods, with concepts that best describe what they see. Activeness is what is lacking. We see things, but we cannot name them. And if we cannot name, we'll remain unseen. You name so that you can be seen. Anything without a name does not exist. And therefore, as you journey in the research that you do, you try to contextualize it. Name that you see that is not.
Thank you. There's a question from Vincent Satari, and He wants to know if these methodologies apply in biomedical sciences.
Medical sciences, science actually are also very, very oppressive because they have a laboratory. They will go to indigenous people and talk about the herb, and the indigenous person will train the herb, and then they will take it to the lab. And once that herb reaches the lab, it loses its indigeneity. It loses its name. It disappears, and the knowledge becomes the knowledge of the medical doctors and the chemists who are repackaging that indigenous knowledge.
Right.
And so when we talk indigenous methodologies, we are saying, what is the best way to do research so that you do not steal other people's knowledge? Yours cannot be stolen because you ask me to cite you, you ask me to reference you. But what about the indigenous holder? How do you reference it? How do you reference the fact that you took that herb from an indigenous person? Yes, the medical science is also as guilty and even more guilty than the social sciences.
And we have a comment from Blakey who says, phenomenal woman, thank you. You reminded me of my PhD thesis in April, where I indicated having used an emic approach so that I couldn't impose and define poverty using Western lenses. And there's also Sabo saying, thank you, Professor, for such a wonderful presentation, despite the interruptions. My question is, how do you deal with challenges where you are trying to conduct indigenous interview method, but the participants are used to the Western methods, where researcher is still perceived always as the knower and questions are answered so scholarly-like, and concepts are already colonized?
Yes. When you do research, the first thing that you need to do is to create that relationship. Relational epistemologies, relational ontologies are about the value of relationships. Of course, people are not going to open up and begin to answer outside the box for as long as you also have remained in that box. So the question is, you have to find ways of building relationships with the communities so that they can begin to speak in their language. When you greet somebody and you want to talk to them, you know that they are now comfortable when they ask you, Ghana, whose child are you? Why do they say, whose child are you? They are trying to establish a relationship with you. So indigenous research methodologies are about creating relationships as a basis for every step, every process in the research process.
Yes, there's a lot of PhD students that are really listening intently at what you're saying. And a comment here is from Obadan Apata, says, thank you, Prof, for such a powerful lecture. My name is Apata Obadan Francis. I'm an MPhil PhD student at UB in sociology, and I have read your work extensively. It's truly inspiring. My question is, in my study, I'm using decolonizing and indigenous methodologies. I'm studying the lived experiences of LGBTQ students on the UB campus. Studies have shown that homophobia is actually a colonial construct. Thus, it should be decolonized to give voices to self-identifying LGBTQ people whose voices haven't really been heard. My question is, with the COVID-19 protocols, how do we use indigenous research will using technology as a data collection method be wise? So does technology facilitate indigenous data collection methods?
Yes, indeed, technology does facilitate indigenous research methodologies because technology is about networks. There are so many networks. You can touch so many bases. You can actually create a network that includes people from your village or people with the totem crocodile and begin just to converse with those people. So indeed, technology, because of its ability to create networks, is one of the best ways in which you can actually do research, because you identify the networking. Who are you networking with? Who are these people? And they can even begin to talk about themselves, their identities, in ways that does not enable you if maybe you were to do one-on-one, because it will take a longer time.
Right. So you are basically asking us to also resist the tendency to think of technology as at odds with the indigenous.
The indigenous is the indigenous is also technology wise. You cannot talk about indigenous knowledge without talking about indigenous technology. There is indigenous technology. And it's a pity that when you talk indigenous, people begin to think about superstitions and magic. We're talking about knowledge systems, and no society can exist without technology. And our resilience is an indication that we do have technology. Our totems, our networking with the totems and being able to sustain our environments because of totems, that's a technology.
Still more gratitude from those that are listening right now. And here is Toyin. Thanks, Prof. My question is this. It's time for academics in the South to start theorizing indigenous knowledges. And if so, how do we operationalize these theories? And if there are any questions from the floor, you can show by raising your hand if you'd like to ask a question. I see Dr. Schelle there has a question. So maybe instead of responding to this one, we can take a couple of questions at once. Professor Schelle. And while he's coming to the podium to ask, there's also a comment and a question
The other one was what?
It was about theorizing indigenous
How do you
knowledges.
theorize?
How do you theorize? And therefore, how do you operationalize? I think it's the line of naming, because that naming process is not just to give a tag. It is a deeply taxonomous process. So there's also Ludo who says, thank you, Prof, for your talk. My question is, how do we respond to the global North's ownership of decolonizing their curriculum? How do we respond to that? What are they decolonizing? My question is, how do we respond to the global North's ownership of decolonizing their curriculum? How do we respond to that? I think here the question is, if people in the North perhaps recognize that they have been operating from a non-decolonized curriculum, can they speak about decolonization having been part of the process initially?
Okay, should I answer the two?
And then,
Okay.
Latang, since you're already up here,
Let me answer this and then
Okay.
Okay. So theorizing indigenous, how do you theorize and how you operationalize? The work is ongoing. I've told you that you can theorize from our interactions with the environment. For example, the relationship between the honeybee and the hunter. And what did we operationalize that relationship? We operationalize by talking about ethics, research ethics. The hunter, the bird wants to be paid back. The bird wants to be respected. And therefore, what are the indigenous ethical principles? Respect, reciprocity, responsiveness, reverence, and so on and so on. Actually, there are 9 principles that are just derived from how the honeybee works with the hunter. And then decolonizing curriculum. Can the West decolonize the curriculum? Why would they want to decolonize the curriculum? This whole thing is about ownership of knowledge. Research is about ownership of knowledge. It's about whose knowledge is valid. It's about marketing. It's about money. If they decolonize their research, their curriculum, how will they, what will be the market value for that?
Okay.
It's not in their interest to do so.
Time is not on our side. Latan, we'll take your question as the last one because we are starting again at 2.
Thank you, Chilisa, for this presentation. I have a question, and the question is, you're talking about indigenous knowledge. You are as if it's only Western and non-Western. So can we not have indigenous knowledge in the Western world? And then another little question is, you seem to dismiss the Western world, Western knowledge, Western methodologies. And then there's a puzzle here that your books are recommended in the Western world and not necessarily in the non-Western world. I mean, it's a puzzle. Can you respond to that? And then the very last one thing, again, we are talking about decolonization and so on, but talking about your background, it appears you were talking about your father, identify with your father's totem and so on, and then the knowledge that you got from your father. And we haven't heard anything about your mother, except you mentioned that she has another totem, but you are identifying with your father's totem. So my question is, are you not perpetuating this notion of colonialism? Thank you.
The first question is around what is the place of Western knowledge in relation to indigenous knowledge or indigenous research methods. Is there possibility in the way that you? Oh, yeah.
Okay. Basically, my book is bought in the Western knowledge more than in the non-Western. Why is it so? My book does not dismiss Western knowledge. Actually, it uses the concept I am because we are to say, let's have integration of knowledge systems. My book actually says we can adapt Western methodologies, but we should go beyond adaptation because the West is inviting us to participate in the production of knowledge in a competitive manner. So the West is saying, create the methods, create the tools. Let's see. That is why we are saying now, my book goes further to say, yes, now here we are. Here we are bringing an indigenous paradigm. The West, can you please embrace it?
I think we should stop there.
Yes.
And then the other conversation about being between mom and dad, where the influence comes from.
Yes. Can I say it a bit? I talk about my mother a lot. And my mother has taught me to do multiple tasks. You see, I'm married, I have 4 children, I went to school, and as I was going to school, I was having babies and being a married woman and so on and so on. This is multiple tasks. My mother, she was fetching water from far, and she knows she would ride a bicycle and at the same time balance a bucket on her head. I've admired that a lot, and that has taught me to multiple tasks. Also, of course, in a patriarchal society, it also shows how the burden of bringing up children and the burden of being a woman overwhelmed by the chores in the home.
Thank you. We will proceed with Professor Bagele will be available in the next session starting at 2 o'clock. She will also be in attendance so we can have further engagements with her. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hey.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This was truly engaging, truly eye-opening, and we are really blessed to be amongst the learned, amongst the world-renowned professors that are sharing their knowledge with us. Some of us are still early career researchers, and it's really good that we are being engaged in this multiple perspectives into carrying out research. So thank you very much, Professor Bagele Chilisa, for that insightful presentation. So next, we are going to go into parallel sessions after our break, which means we are going to have a very short break of about 30 minutes, and we should be resuming our sessions at 1400. Now, may I encourage all session coordinators or moderators to log in first before they grab anything to eat, so that at least the media team is able to work out the logistics while you have something to eat. Let's do that. Let's be on time and let's respect time. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy your afternoon.